Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back to Conversations in the Digital Age. Our show is about the CIA and torture. With us is John Rizzo. John Rizzo served the agency for 34 years, rising to become the head of the legal department. He was at the center of the controversy between the agency and Congress over the issue of the legality of torture. The question is it legitimate to use enhanced interrogation techniques in order to thwart a terrorist attack on the United States? John Rizzo is the author of a marvelous new book entitled Company Man. It's certainly a bestseller and certainly a great read. John, we're delighted to have you with us.
Good to be with you, Jim.
First, thank you for your dedicated service to our country. 34 years from 1975 to 2009. Congratulations on your book, which is a marvelous memoir of your roller coaster experiences at the CIA, an extraordinary career. First, why are we all so fascinated with the CIA? Is it the secrecy factor?
I think secrecy more than anything else. You know, we all grew up, certainly you and I did, with the emergence of the James Bond character in Ian Fleming's books, and of course CIA has been a staple in novels, movies, now TV shows. I think the secrecy casts inevitably as sort of a seductive danger to anything that's perceived to be associated with those three letters.
Now, whatever inspired you, you became a lawyer, to seek a job at the CIA?
Well, it wasn't something I aspired to growing up, I promise you that. Basically, in one word, it was boredom. At the time I put in my application, I was in my late 20s, a couple of years out of law school. I was working in the government at the Treasury Department, but you know, when we're young and in our 20s, we're ambitious and restless and want to do something.
And maybe a little reckless.
Yeah, yeah, that too. In any event, I just thought I had seen for the first time all of the CIA misdeeds that had come out a year or two earlier in the New York Times, Cy Hirsch's pieces, followed by the Church Committee hearings in the Senate. And I was watching and reading all of this, and really, I was looking for something else, and thought just occurred to me as I was reading and watching all these stories about what CIA had done, that I have no idea whether CIA has lawyers, but if they don't, they may need some now.
So you knew it was hazardous duty. The Church Committee was certainly down on the agency at that time.
Yeah.
All sorts of revelations.
Yeah, it was. I must say, it was. Keep in mind, I was in my 20s, but I was looking at those proceedings with a combination of revulsion and fascination, because as you recall, I mean, all sorts of CIA misdeeds during the 50s and 60s, assassination plots, the drug experiments on unwitting Americans, mail openings during the Vietnam War, anti-war dissenters. I mean, it really was a parade of horribles.
Blowing up Castro's cigar.
Yeah.
All of the dirty tricks.
Yeah.
Now, you went to Brown.
I did.
And you had a professor there named Lyman Kirkpatrick. He was in a wheelchair, and he'd been with the agency. Was he not one of your inspirations for joining the agency?
As I said in the book, looking back on it, he was probably a subconscious inspiration. He was the first person I ever met in my life that had any connection with the CIA. And he was from the Good Shepherd generation of CIA, the old skull and crossbones, the Allen Dulles era. So he was a very patrician-looking guy.
Sounds like a character out of Last Spy Standing.
Yeah, well, imagine, in a wheelchair, ruddy complexion, baritone voice, just enormously impressive figure to me. And he gave me, and at that time I was a 20-year-old kid in college. He gave me my first taste of what the CIA is really like.
You joined the agency, and over 34 years you served 11 directors. I think Bill Colby was the director when you joined the agency, and he left within a short time after you arrived.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
No connection there, Jim.
No connection.
No connection with him leaving. Yeah, he was, as you recall, he was actually sacked by President Ford.
And he was sacked because?
Because, ironically enough, he was deemed by President Ford and most importantly, Secretary of State Kissinger as having been too forthcoming with the Church Committee, too not protective enough of the agency's secrets, which was ironic because William Colby, in his own right, had a very illustrious but controversial career at CIA, but he was deemed too Congress friendly.
Now, you must have sensed at the outset that being director of the CIA and possibly even being in the legal department made you kind of an endangered species.
Yeah, I mean, I had the benefit of going in there totally ignorant about what I was getting into. They don't really tell you much during the vetting process. So it was just a shot in the dark. And as soon as I got there, Colby, by the way, was replaced by a guy named George H.W. Bush.
Well, we've heard of him.
But I realized, honestly, I did not know what I was getting into. Until you get your clearances, you're not allowed to know what kind of work you're going to be doing. So, and I was thrown into the breach right away, even as a young kid.
Why does the CIA need a legal department anyway?
Well, that's one of the reasons I decided to write the book, because no one associates CIA with the law. No one associates CIA as even having lawyers. But the reality is, and this was true when I joined in '76, and it was true at the time I resigned, CIA clients, I call them clients because they're my clients, all the operatives, the analysts, they really do value legal input. Not so much, honestly, Jim, there aren't that many laws that apply to CIA, but what they looked for, they always looked for, was a form of a counsel, an advisor on a broader role, in other words, for a lawyer. And just to give you an illustration of the growth of my office during my career, when I joined in 1976, I was the 18th lawyer hired, 18-man person legal staff. When I retired, there were 130 lawyers, and I believe there are probably closer to 150 and 60 now.
And what do you suppose accounts for the growth? More legal problems?
Ironically, perversely, every time the CIA found itself in some public controversy, which during my career agency could be counted on to get into something, some big flap every few years, every time that would happen, the cry would go out from Congress and inside the executive branch that, my God, CIA needs more lawyers. So as I say, it's perverse in a way, but all of the crises and controversies CIA gets embroiled in has been good for the growth of our office. But of course, we still always manage to get involved in crisis and controversy.
So the CIA became what's called lawyered up.
Lawyered up, that's right.
Now, when you rose to become the head of the legal department, which I guess is in 1997, the director was George Tenet.
Was.
And he was the second longest serving director of Central Intelligence after Allen Dulles. But Tenet's three immediate predecessors, Bob Gates, who became Secretary of Defense, and Jim Woolsey and Deutsch, had served each an average of 1.5 years. Why such a high rate of turnover among CIA directors?
It was that period you talk about, the early 90s. I mean, it's a combination of things. And first of all, I should say that have that kind of turnover in the CIA top job is terribly hard on the organization, on the career people like myself, because you get used to one person, and you turn around, the person's gone, they replace another. Bob Gates was replaced.
Sort of hard on the director too, who finds himself without a job. There's not much job security.
Yeah, it's not much of a political stepping stone, I'll tell you that. Every CIA director has taken the job. Believe me, did not take it to advance his political career, because it's a killer, no-win position.
Now, George Tenet presided over the enhanced interrogation technique program. Now that's, critics of the agency say, just a euphemism for torture.
Right.
And you became familiar with that program, did you not?
I was the. This program was first conceived in early 2002. At that point, I was the head legal officer. It was conceived by the CIA Counterterrorism Department. And so when they came to my office to tell me what they would, felt they had to do to break this high-level terrorist we had at the time, Abu Zubayda, I was the first lawyer to hear what would become known as the enhanced interrogation program. But it was just in its, on the drawing boards at that point. And I found, Jim, when they sat down and described all the techniques, I mean, for instance, they were talking about waterboarding. I really had no idea what waterboarding was before that day. So it really, it was a startling briefing to get.
Well, the CIA had no particular expertise in enhanced interrogation, did it? It kind of took it over on short notice from the Army, isn't that right?
Yeah, no, none at all. I mean, I had been at that point at CIA for over 25 years. I mean, not once had I ever been involved in anything that involved CIA holding people against their will in the so-called secret prisons. We never had secret prisons during my time. We certainly didn't conduct interrogations using techniques anything closely akin to what this was. So this was all new and untested, and frankly, I had never had to consider the legal issue of torture before in my career.
Well, you mentioned waterboarding. There was also sleep deprivation. There was interrogating people who had been apprehended, supposed terrorists and male terrorists in the naked in the presence of female officers. There was slapping them around. There were probably other more obnoxious techniques that you heard about. Did it occur to you that any of these may be illegal?
Well, that was the question, wasn't it? I tell you, when I heard the techniques described to me, I mean, my first reaction was I didn't know, as I say, I had no familiarity, never had to have familiarity with the legal terms of the anti-torture statute. But certainly, waterboarding sounded to me like very close, if not on the legal line. The sleep deprivation, which in and of itself sounds relatively banal, until it was described to me that the sleep deprivation on a detainee could last 11 days. I mean,
11 days without sleep.
That's what the original.
And they're standing at attention, aren't they, while they're being interrogated?
Yeah.
So would any of that trouble you as a lawyer?
Oh yeah.
And so what did you do about it?
Well, I mean, one thing we need to keep in mind here is the context of the time. This was just 3 or 4 months after 9/11. The nation was still in the grip of fear and dread about the next attack, which, as you recall, everyone, it wasn't a question of if, but when.
Dick Cheney thought it was inevitable.
And so did most members of Congress, and according to polls, the American people. In the interim, after 9/11, the first couple of months after 9/11, remember we had the shoe bomber, Richard Reed. We had the anthrax attacks, which at the time thought possibly was an Al-Qaeda operation. So, 9/11 was such a shock, but they had these aftershocks. So that's what I was faced with, that context, that time. And as I say, I was very troubled by these proposals. I'd been at CIA long enough to know when a program or an operation was going to get us in trouble someday, somehow, and this had trouble written all over it. I did not have a lot of time to deliberate. As I say, time was of the essence. We had the senior Al-Qaeda operative named Abu Zubayda in custody. If anyone were to know in Al-Qaeda about a second attack, it would have been this guy. He was basically the logistics chief. And he wasn't talking.
And we waterboarded him.
He was the first one waterboarded, correct.
Now, waterboarding was a technique that certainly was used by the Japanese in World War II. I mean, we became familiar with it as well as during the Vietnam War because our enemies were using it. Was it an issue that came before you as to whether this was an appropriate form of interrogation?
Sure.
And what did you express a view?
Well, I said what my initial view, at least, was waterboarding. Whatever the legal line was, waterboarding to me, it sounded terrifying. And I thought it was either close to or perhaps over the legal line, but I did not know. Which is what ultimately led me. When I say ultimately, after a couple of days. This is why I referred all of these proposed techniques to the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel for a final authoritative legal determination.
3 years after leaving office, George Tenet told CBS in a famous interview, he said, "We don't torture." And President Obama, 2 years later, acknowledged that we tortured some folks, he said. And he issued an executive order forbidding cruel forms of interrogation anywhere in the world. So did the government have some difficulty getting its act together as to whether it tortured or it didn't torture?
Well, I mean, this is one of the, this has always been fascinating to me. As the years have gone by and the program, as you know, was abolished by President Obama in his first couple of days of office. Torture seems to be in the eye of the beholder. Yes.
Not in the eye of the person who's being tortured.
Well, I mean, but we're lawyers. We're lawyers, Jim. You and I are lawyers, and there's a definition of torture in federal statutes, which which is not terribly specific. I did not think, and more importantly, the Justice Department at the time did not consider these techniques to meet the legal threshold for torture. But other people obviously believed otherwise, concluded otherwise, lawyers as well as academicians. And that's where the debate continues, seemingly never ending.
The Justice Department, while you were there, expressed a written opinion which was addressed to you, the so-called Bybee Memorandum, which concluded it was not torture, isn't that right?
That's correct.
That was later rescinded, but they did express that opinion.
Yeah.
And you distributed it within the agency, isn't that right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why I wanted to have Justice Department to give me their views in writing and in detail, because I wanted to provide legal protection to our people, the career CIA people, who would be actually carrying out the program.
So they wouldn't be indicted.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was an important role for me, I thought.
Yeah. Now, the interrogation of Zubayda, including his waterboarding, was taped by the agency, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
And you were aware it was being taped when that happened?
Well, no, I wasn't aware of that it was being taped until the senior people in the Counterterrorism Center came to me. This was in October 2002.
Counterterrorism Center in the agency?
In CIA. To tell me that they wanted to destroy the tapes that they had made of the interrogation.
So you were surprised that they had taped it?
Yeah, I didn't. Until then, I didn't realize that such tapes were made or were in existence.
And did you advise them as to the legality or propriety of destroying the tapes?
Yeah,
What'd you say?
I said, this is not a good idea. Now, in fairness to them, their position was it's not that they were doing anything untoward on these tapes. It's just that the tapes we've looked at them, and it shows our people in plain view, and our Counterterrorism Center people, CIA, were convinced that someday, somehow, those tapes were going to leak. And so that was their rationale for wanting them destroyed.
So they wanted to protect the identity of the people who were administering the program.
But as a lawyer, what I said earlier, CIA lawyers often counsel on things not strictly legal. This was in that category. We are lawyers. What would it have looked like if someday, and someday it would have come out, the CIA had tapes of very harsh interrogations, and that the CIA had turned around and destroyed those tapes? I mean, it would have sounded Nixonian, like an 18-minute gap in the Rosemary Woods tapes. I mean, it's just the perception would have been awful. And
well, many thought Nixon should have destroyed the White House tapes.
Yeah,
and perhaps he would have been better off, and perhaps he wouldn't have been. But they, in fact, did destroy them, didn't they?
They did. This was 3 years later.
That was unknown to you. The destruction of the tapes was unknown to you.
No, yeah, absolutely. I had counseled in the interim period. You know, there were our people, especially the head of covert operations, continued to be adamant that he wanted to destroy the tapes. It was very important to him. By this time, other voices had weighed in. The White House, the Director of National Intelligence, John Negroponte, they had all learned about these tapes, and they had all counseled. It wasn't just lawyers, but you know, common sense counsel. No, don't destroy these tapes. I mean, there were investigations going on, litigations. Who knew? But finally, in November of 2005, the head of operations, who had been advocating this destruction and been coming to me, beseeching me to approve it, basically turned around and did it on his own.
So you never approved it?
Never approved it.
Never approved it. Was it a good idea, as you look back on it in retrospect, that they destroyed the tapes?
Well, no, because well, you know, it led to, we're talking about today, because it led to a huge controversy when it came out that the...
With Congress. Did you ever see the tapes?
I never did. No. I never did. They were kept in the facility where the secret prison was, where Zubayda was. So they were, you know, I think everyone was worried about they would be lost or damaged in transit. So I never actually saw them, but lawyers who worked for me, I sent out there to view them. And they came back with two conclusions. One, that everything on the tapes was within the bounds of what the Justice Department had approved in terms of the procedures. And secondly, but that the tapes are very hard to watch.
Now, you were subsequently criticized in Congress and in the media as the torture advocate.
Yeah.
Was that fair, do you think?
Well, it's got a certain catchy ring to it. No, I didn't. You know, I mean, I saw my role as twofold. One, to get a definitive determination of whether these techniques legally constituted torture. That's why I went to the Department of Justice. And secondly, to get some definitive determination for our people who are going to be carrying out the program. And these, as I say, these aren't, you know, senior people. I mean, these are GS 12s, 13s. So I didn't consider myself an advocate, certainly for this program, or for torture, certainly. I was just trying to answer the question. And if the Justice Department had concluded that these techniques did constitute torture, we would never have done them. I wouldn't have done them.
That was good enough for you that the Justice Department, at least at first, concluded that it was all right.
Well, yeah, I wanted something definitive.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you another question. Did torture prove to be an effective technique in thwarting terrorist attacks? So there should be a range of opinions on that subject.
Yeah, well, that's the ultimate question, isn't it? There's a Senate Intelligence Committee report that's been...
Hasn't come out yet.
No, latest word is it's coming out at the end of this month, end of November. And which apparently takes a position, I've never seen it, I've been denied access to looking at it, is that basically the interrogation program yielded no benefits. All of the intelligence that was acquired from these detainees could have been acquired without this program. I don't know. I mean, you know, the question of did we have to do this to get the information? I think that's unknowable. What we didn't have was the time to to elicit sort of question and answer from these hardened killers, murderers, psychopathic murderers. So I don't know whether we could have gotten the information, but there can be no doubt. And even Leon Panetta, my last CI director, a guy who considered the program torture, says in his new book, there is no getting around the fact that this program yielded important, this is a direct quote, important, even critical intelligence.
So I have a question for you, John Rizzo. Are CIA officers an endangered species?
No, I don't think so, Jim. I think...
You think there's public confidence in them?
I think so. I think there is. I think the American people want to be protected.
American people want to be protected. That's your conclusion. Well, congratulations on your book. Thank you so much for coming by.
Jim,
We've run out of time. Sadly, we'd go on forever. And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations in the digital age. Oh, and please visit our website at www.digitalage.org.